Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we really try to cut through the noise and get straight to what works. If you've ever tried learning a new language, you know that feeling, right? Staring at these just endless vocabulary lists. It feels totally overwhelming, like this massive dictionary is just impossible to climb.
Oh, absolutely. It's the ultimate productivity killer in language learning, I think. The old ways.
Yeah.
Starting with random AZ lists or drilling words from chapter themes or just hoping, sheer exposure works eventually. It's often why people just quit. They put in like 90% of their effort learning words they barely ever use.
Exactly. And that's the core problem. Not all words are, well, equally useful. So today, we're diving deep into a much smarter way, a really efficient two-part strategy we've pulled from the source material. Our mission really is to show you how using frequency lists can build you a quick, solid foundation in vocab, and then how to pivot critically towards words that actually matter to your life.
Yeah, and we've got some pretty solid data on this, specific word counts, what they unlock in terms of comprehension, and we're definitely going to unpack the memory science too. The actual systems and tricks to make sure those crucial words really stick permanently.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're talking about a core strategy, especially for busy adults, right? I mean, we can't all just drop everything and move somewhere. That kind of brute force immersion isn't practical. We need a plan, a targeted one. And the sources really hammer this home. Start with high-frequency words.
It's just pure linguistic efficiency. I mean, researchers look at massive amounts of language, millions and millions of words spoken and written, and this clear pattern emerges. It's like the Pareto principle. A small number of words does most of the work. So the crucial first step, front load those words. The data overwhelmingly says, start by systematically learning the top 1,000 words in your target language.
1,000. Okay, that immediately sounds
Yeah.
less scary, way less daunting than cracking open a dictionary a day. But, I mean, native speakers know tens of thousands, right?
Yeah.
So what does that first 1,000 words actually let you do?
The payoff is huge right away. Now, if you're aiming for, let's say, a pretty high level of basic fluency, navigating daily stuff, understanding basic chats, getting the main idea of the news, then you probably want to push that up to maybe 1,500 or even 2,000 words.
Okay, so goal number 1, hit that 1,000-word mark. Goal number 2, for a solid foundation, aim for 2,000. What kind of understanding, what comprehension level are we talking about with those 1,000 to 2,000 words?
Right. This is the number that really changes the game. Learning those top 1,000 to 2,000 words, it lets you recognize roughly 75% to 85% of what you typically read or hear.
Hold on. Up to 85% coverage with just 2,000 words. So basically, you're spending your time learning the absolute essentials. The glue words, conjunctions, prepositions, the really common verbs and nouns that pop up in almost every sentence.
Exactly. That 85% is like your scaffolding. It lets you start inferring the rest from context. It's the point where the language stops being just noise, and starts feeling like a puzzle you can actually figure out. You get the structure, the action. You can usually guess the missing pieces. That foundation is just non-negotiable.
Okay, now let's think about scaling up. If we want to get closer to, say, near-native understanding, like 98% coverage, how much more vocabulary do we need to bridge that gap, that last 13% or so?
Well, this is where the effort really ramps up. And the type of words changes too. To understand about 98% of what's said in like casual conversation or a movie, you're jumping from maybe 2,000 words up to around 6,000 different words.
6,000, wow.
Yeah, it's a big jump. And those extra 4,000 words are often more specific nouns, abstract ideas, maybe more subtle verbs or idioms that just don't show up in that top 2,000 list.
That's a serious commitment, but okay, good to know. 6,000 gets you through most daily interactions in media. What about reading, though? Written stuff tends to use richer language, right?
It definitely does. If your goal is really tackling novels or understanding newspapers in depth, well, the number goes up again. To hit that same 98% coverage in more complex written material, you're probably looking at 8,000 to 9,000 words. That accounts for specialized terms, names, more literary or low-frequency stuff.
Right. So the goal for an adult learner isn't necessarily to swallow the dictionary whole. It's more about hitting that, say, 6,000 to 9,000 word sweet spot where things become pretty smooth. How does that compare to native speakers?
Well, native speakers just keep absorbing words their whole lives, right? They often end up with vocabularies closer to 20,000 different words, sometimes adding maybe 1,000 words a year just through living and reading. So when you're setting your goal, it's really about functional comprehension, not trying to match a lifetime of natural acquisition.
Makes sense. And speaking of function, the source material had this great little story about contextual efficiency. It really highlights why that personalization matters so much later on.
Oh, yeah. That study is key. It basically compared learning general language versus focusing really narrowly on a specific field. So in general context, getting to 90% comprehension takes about 5,500 words, roughly. But, and this is the cool part, researchers found that someone focused only on, say, academic papers about ancient Greek philosophy. They could hit that same 90% comprehension with only 2,750 words.
Wait, seriously? They got the same functional understanding for their specific need with almost half the words.
Exactly. It proves that if you focus your study tightly, you can cut down the total word count significantly. If you're learning a language just for, I don't know, software engineering docs or historical research, you can probably skip thousands of common, everyday words that just aren't relevant to you. It massively speeds things up within your niche.
That is the ultimate shortcut, strategically speaking. It also ties into that more philosophical point the source has made about words being like our communal brain.
That's a lovely way to put it, isn't it? When we share a word, like dog or tree, it sort of contains the history of every dog or tree we've collectively seen or experienced. It's a shared mental concept. And those top 1,000 to 2,000 words, they're basically the shared vocabulary of that communal brain. Everyone needs those.
But once you step outside that really common ground, the words you need become much more specific to you.
Precisely. After you nail that foundation, the vocabulary you need next isn't dictated by some universal list anymore. It's dictated by what you actually do, what you read, what you care about, and recognizing that. That's the key to unlocking part 2 of this whole strategy.
Okay, so foundation established. Nail down those 1,500 to 2,000 high-frequency words first, efficiently. Now the pivot, because if we just keep drilling generic frequency lists forever, we'll end up learning super rare words we might never actually use, right? So what does this personalization pivot actually look like?
Think of that initial frequency list like a generic roadmap. Now you start drawing your own map based on your personal interests, your needs. So if you're learning Italian because you love cinema and cooking, you immediately start grabbing words about filmmaking, types of pasta, regional food terms, even if they're not in the top 5,000 general words.
Right, but how do you find those specific words? It's not like frequency lists have a category for, 19th century French poetry terms.
Well, a good starting point is often thematic vocabulary books. The source mentioned one like Mastering German Vocabulary, for example. They're usually organized by topic,
Right.
travel, politics, food, technology, whatever. You don't read them cover to cover. That'd be boring and inefficient. You skim. You find the sections relevant to you, identify maybe the key 100 or 200 words for those contexts, and those become your next targets. And it's highly motivating, right? Because these are words you know you'll actually use soon.
That makes sense. Switching from a generic list to words you chose must feel pretty good. And there's another tool that unlocks once you hit that 1,000-word milestone, right? Something that forces you to think in the language. The monolingual dictionary.
Oh, absolutely critical. That's a huge psychological shift and a practical one. Once you know those top 1,000-ish words, you should generally be able to understand definitions written entirely in the target language.
Meaning you ditch the English translation crutch.
You stop constantly mapping back to English, and that is a massive step towards thinking in the language, which is crucial for fluency. You're building concepts directly within the new language, not just finding equivalents. Plus, those definitions often use other high-frequency words you already know to explain the new one. It reinforces everything.
Okay, and what about using output? Like actually trying to use the language? The sources talked about self-directed writing. How does forcing yourself to write about personal stuff help you find the right next words?
Because writing immediately exposes your gaps in real time. You sit down, try to write a paragraph about your job or your vacation or what you want for dinner. You use the words and grammar you have, even if it feels clunky or basic.
So, like, if I want to describe how my cat likes to snuggle, but I don't know the word snuggle, I have to maybe look it up, use it awkwardly, and then I send that whole messy paragraph somewhere.
Exactly. You send that piece of writing off to a tutor or maybe post it on a language exchange site like italki and ask for corrections. And when those corrections come back, boom, you get immediate, necessary, super relevant vocabulary and grammar fixes tailored specifically to what you were trying to say about your life. You're basically turning your own mistakes into the perfect learning material.
That's brilliant. You're not studying what some textbook thinks you need next week. You're studying the exact word or phrase you just failed to produce 5 minutes ago while talking about your own cat. This sounds very connected to that idea of comprehensible input, doesn't it?
It is, definitely. But we need to be clear about where Stephen Krashen's CI idea fits in. The concept that we acquire language best when the input is just slightly above our current level, that y plus $1.
Right, the idea that you learn best from stuff you almost understand.
Yes, but the sources are quite specific here. Very early beginners. They aren't really at the stage where they can just rely on CI alone. Why? Because they don't really have the I yet. They're still building the absolute basics, those high frequency words, simple sentence structures, basic conjugations. They're learning how the pieces even fit together. So you really need that initial 1,500 to 2,000 word foundation first. Then CI really starts to kick in and becomes the main engine for acquisition because you have enough context to understand new things.
Got it. So the early work is focused, systematic effort on the foundation using frequency lists. And that effort gives you the eye needed to then jump into the flow of comprehensible input where the real acceleration can happen.
That's the strategic timeline, exactly. Efficiency first, then immersion driven by comprehensible input.
All right, so we know which words to learn first, frequency, then personal relevance. We know how to find them. But now, the constant battle, forgetting. The sources call it the greatest foe, which sounds dramatic but feels pretty accurate. If you're not immersed 24/7, how do you stop all this hard-won information from just leaking out?
Right, we fight forgetting with smart timing, and that's the whole idea behind spaced repetition systems, or SRS immersion, works by brute force, right? Constant re-exposure. But busy adults, we need a practical plan. SRS maximizes memory retention with minimal time investment.
And this is where the efficiency claims get pretty wild. Tell us about what focused daily SRS practice can actually achieve.
The results are pretty extraordinary, mainly because you stop wasting time reviewing things you already know cold. The data suggests that practicing just 30 minutes a day for about 4 months using a good SRS system, that can lead to learning and retaining something like 3,600 flashcards with 90–95% accuracy.
3,600 words or facts in 4 months, remembering over 90%. That's a massive return for half an hour a day. But the core idea of SRS feels kind of backward, doesn't it? You deliberately wait until you've almost forgotten the word before you review it again. Why is struggling better?
It ties into how our brains consolidate memories. That little moment of difficulty, that effort you make to pull the word back just before it disappears, that's what strengthens the neural connection. It makes the memory more permanent. It's often called the testing effect. Review too soon, and you're just practicing short-term recall, which is easy but doesn't last. Wait the just right amount of time, force that retrieval effort, and the brain basically says, okay, this must be important. I almost lost it. Better lock it down.
Right, that resistance builds the memory muscle.
Hmm.
And this idea is solid. It even predates computers, right? Like the old Leitner box system.
Oh yeah, the Leitner box is a perfect physical example of this exponential spacing. It's just a box, maybe with 7 dividers, labeled level 1, level 2, and so on. Every new card starts in level 1. Get it right. It moves to level 2. Next day, you review level 2. Get that right. Moves to level 3, which maybe you don't review for 3 days. Level 4 might be a week. Level 5, 2 weeks. The intervals get longer.
And if I forget, I don't know, the Hungarian word Mosca for cat when it comes up in level 4 after 2 weeks.
That failure is actually crucial data for the system. If you forget it, bam, it falls all the way back to level 1. You have to relearn it and prove you know it again through the shorter intervals. The system constantly corrects itself. Only the words that survive those increasingly long waits, the ones you successfully recall right when they were about to fade, earn their place in long-term memory. The structure itself forces that optimal timing.
Okay, timing is key. But what about the quality of the memory itself? When we're trying to learn thousands of words, how do we make them stick better than just rote repetition?
We need to create richer connections, multi-sensory ones. We leverage what memory researchers call levels of processing. And there are 2 big things we know for sure about human memory. First, our visual memory is just phenomenal.
How phenomenal are we talking?
Well, there are these classic studies where college students were shown like 10,000 different pictures over 5 days. Later, when tested, they could accurately identify 83% of them. Our brains are just wired to remember images way better than abstract words alone.
Wow. Okay, so the practical takeaway for language learning is pretty clear then.
Yeah.
Every new word needs a picture.
Absolutely. Non-negotiable, really. Use Google Images, find a relevant picture, even better. Draw a quick, simple stick figure yourself. The sources emphasize that even just the act of finding or creating that image for your flashcard is a powerful, deep processing step. It connects the foreign word directly to the concept, bypassing the English translation middleman.
Okay, visual hooks.
Eh.
And the second memory principle, you said it's even stronger.
Personal connection. Making something personally relevant makes it about 50% easier to remember. Our strongest memories are tied to our own lives, our emotions, our history. So if you're learning the French word for bread, pain, and you consciously link it to a specific memory, maybe the smell of your grandmother's baking or that amazing baguette you had in Paris, that word becomes way more resilient to forgetting.
So we're not just memorizing words, we're anchoring them, using names, places, feelings, specific memories from our lives. And if we don't do this, we fall prey to what the sources call the mnemonic filter. What's that?
Yeah, the mnemonic filter is basically the brain's spam filter for abstract, useless information. If you just see a new foreign word totally out of context, like "your," which is Old Norse for me, just written on a card, no picture, no story, no connection, your brain instantly flags it as irrelevant noise. It goes in one ear and out the other, forgotten almost immediately. To beat that filter, the word needs multiple hooks right from the start. How it sounds, how it's spelled, what it means, and some kind of personal or visual connection.
We tend to think of a word as just one thing.
Mhm.
But the sources make this great point that a word is more like a quiet symphony. It's this complex package, right? Sound, spelling, meaning, sometimes grammar rules attached. To really know a word, you need the whole symphony.
Exactly. And if you miss a piece of that symphony, you end up with what you could call a broken word. Like, you might read the name Descartes and think it sounds one way based on English spelling, but then you hear a French speaker say something like Descartes or Descartes. If you can't connect the written form you know to the sound you're hearing, it breaks comprehension. Recall suffers too.
And if you don't nail down good pronunciation habits early on, you can spend ages trying to fix those broken words later. It's like doing the work twice. So how do we train our ears, especially for sounds that just don't exist in English?
Right, for those tricky sounds, maybe the difference between R and L in Japanese for an English speaker, or subtle vowel sounds like German Latzes. The
No.
key is very specific ear training, usually involving immediate feedback with minimal pairs.
Minimal pairs. Those are words that differ by just one single sound, like ship and sheep.
Precisely. So you use a tool, maybe software or an app, you hear a word, you click which of the minimal pair you think you heard, and you get instant feedback. Green check for right, red X for wrong. The sources say this can actually rewire the brain incredibly fast, sometimes in just like 3 focused 20-minute sessions. That immediate feedback loop forces your brain to create a new category for that sound it previously couldn't distinguish.
Yeah, that's rapid training for the ear. Okay, what about training the mouth? You encounter some monster consonant cluster, like that Russian word bestrognu, meaning flinch, or a classic German monster like Höchstgeschwindigkeitsbegrenzung for speed limit. How do you even physically say that?
Yeah, for those, you use a technique called backchaining. It sounds weird, but instead of starting at the beginning and stumbling, you start at the end of the word. You say the last sound or syllable, then add the one before it and work your way backward. So for vizdrognu, you'd master nu, then rognu, then drognu, and finally build up the whole thing, vizdrognu. You build the muscle memory from back to front.
Ah, okay, so for that long German word, I'd start with just zung, then maybe rinzung, then
Yeah.
big rinzung, and just keep adding pieces backward until the whole thing flows.
Exactly. It breaks the difficulty down into manageable chunks. You anchor it from the end. It's much more effective for motor control than trying to power through a dozen consonants in a row from the start.
Okay, that makes sense. This brings us to grammar, which, let's be honest, is often the part learners dread the most, right? Endless drills, memorizing charts. Are you saying we can kind of skip the painful parts?
We can, and we probably should, skip the really monotonous drills, yeah? The science seems pretty clear that language acquisition, that subconscious language machine in our heads that figures out patterns, it runs primarily on comprehensible input. No amount of consciously drilling one specific grammar rule seems to allow you to just skip a natural developmental stage in that subconscious process. The machine needs data, meaningful data, not just rote memorization of rules.
Okay, so if the subconscious machine is doing the heavy lifting with patterns from input, what's the smart way to use a grammar book? What's its role?
Think of the grammar book as your guided tour. Your conscious mind uses it to look at the map, right? Read the explanation, understand the rules of the road for that language. But then, crucially, you find just one or two really clear, interesting, maybe even vivid examples of that rule in action. Like for Italian plurals, maybe you focus on pizza and gelati. You make flashcards for those specific examples, maybe add a picture or personal connection, put them into your SRS, and then you skip the pages and pages of boring fill-in-the-blank exercises.
Ah, so you feed the language machine the data it needs, the examples, while giving your conscious brain the framework, the explanation, to help recognize the pattern later in real input.
Exactly. And speaking of frameworks, if your target language uses grammatical gender, masculine, feminine, neuter, you absolutely have to bake that information into your memory of the word right from the start. Otherwise, you'll constantly stumble over articles and adjectives later.
Right, and the sources suggest some pretty intense imagery for this to make it stick.
It has to be memorable. Use really vivid, maybe even slightly absurd or violent mnemonic images. So if a German noun like Mädchen, which means girl or maiden, is actually neuter, you might take a second to vividly imagine, I don't know, that maiden shattering into 1,000 pieces, making her neutral. If a Spanish word is masculine, maybe you imagine it being wielded by a powerful, aggressive male figure. The key is making the image multisensory, maybe emotional, definitely unforgettable. Do this for a few hundred nouns, and your brain starts to internalize the patterns, often subconsciously.
That whole package approach, sound, spelling, meaning, visual, grammar hook, personal link, seems essential to make the word truly yours. Okay, last point here.
Yeah.
Let's loop back to getting corrections from actually using the language, like in writing.
Yes. This is honestly one of the absolute best features of using SRS effectively. When you get a correction, maybe it's a grammar mistake you keep making or word you were missing, you immediately turn that single correction into a flashcard. Because the SRS ensures you review it at the optimal time and forces you to recall it successfully, you often only need to get that correction once. That one instance gets locked in, corrected, permanently. You're essentially fixing your fossilized errors and making the right pattern stick forever. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, okay. This has been a really deep dive into doing vocabulary the smart way, the efficient way. Let's just quickly recap the core strategy for everyone listening, that two-part plan.
Absolutely. Step 1, build the foundation. Prioritize. Use SRS, use vivid imagery, use personal connections to really nail down those first 1,000 to 2,000 most frequent words. That gets you huge immediate comprehension, like 75–85% fast.
Right. Foundation first. And step 2.
Pivot. Once that core is solid, you switch gears completely. You go personal. Find thematic vocabulary based on your specific life, your job, your hobbies, travel plans. Use tools like monolingual dictionaries. Get feedback from writing. Constantly generate and learn the next words that are most relevant to you.
And the adult learner actually has some advantages here, right?
Yes.
We might not absorb things like kids do, but we're better at strategy.
Totally. Adults are generally better at setting long-term goals, using learning techniques consciously, reflecting on what works. Remember, fluency isn't about never making mistakes. It's about getting consistent, good quality input, fighting for getting intelligently, and practicing recall of the words that genuinely matter to your communication goals.
And as we wrap up, there's that broader benefit too. This isn't just about learning words. It's actually changing your brain in measurable ways. It's like strength training.
It really is. When you're constantly working in a second language, your brain is doing this incredible juggling act, managing interference from your native language.
Yeah.
You're actively practicing inhibiting your L1, muffling it.
And that constant mental effort, that inhibition, has knock-on effects.
It does. Studies show that by practicing this linguistic control, you actually strengthen the parts of your brain responsible for executive function, for cognitive control in general. You literally get better at focusing, at switching tasks, at ignoring distractions in any situation. So learning a language isn't just about talking to more people, it's making your mind sharper, more focused, more agile. Definitely something powerful to consider the next time you're deciding which words are worth the effort to really lock into your long-term memory.